Continuing with Gregory Brandt's excellent book, Homeless College Student. It's available on Kindle and for free on Amazon. This is chapter 6, Hardest Kind of Homeless. There are many levels of homelessness. Some are worse than others. Whether you're sleeping in a car, crashing on a friend's couch, or camping in the woods, you're homeless. The hardest thing about being homeless on any level is doing it without something to look forward to. At this point in my life, I'd been homeless in a van, a truck, and next to some railroad tracks, but each time I had something to lean on, whether it was a job, a woman, or just a check coming in the mail. Now I was experiencing something new, undeniable, bottom of the barrel, next to death homelessness. My first day of it I spent in North Star Mall. It was early July and dangerous to be outside. I found water at the mall's drinking fountains, the same one we used as kids, and sat on a bench in front of them reading old newspapers. It was nice to be in the air conditioning and watch women saunter by. After a few hours, I got up and walked around, looked in all the shop's windows, and admired the clothes that I was too poor to even recognize the label. Michael wasn't living at Mom's house at the time, so there was no one there to sneak me food or a blanket. The only place I could think of going was the woods by our old middle school. So, for the next few days, I slept in a ditch and lived off candy I stole from the grocery store. One morning, I got caught shoplifting by a priest and saw it as a sign to pack my bag, abandon my drainage ditch, and walk to the other end of town to find my old pal John Hersey. I hadn't seen him in months, but I figured we were still friends. It took a while to get a hold of him, and when I did, I was surprised to see he wasn't too thrilled to hear about what I've been going through. He used to love my stories when my apartment was the official hangout spot for him and his crew, but now he moved out of his parents' house and didn't need me or my place. Percy knew that everything I'd done for him, he was at least obligated to put me up for a few nights, so I started hanging out with him and his stoner crowd again. But it was completely different this time around. I felt like a burden. Percy acted like I was a criminal. Whenever he'd leave the apartment, he'd say, "Don't steal anything." The thought never crossed my mind until he rudely suggested it. Percy said he wanted to help, but the whole time I was there, he made me feel like dirt. I was about to turn 23, and he made a point of it to remind me of my age and lack of education almost daily. "Greg, when are you going to get your life together?" he'd ask. "You've known me for a year," I told him. "It's always the same old story with you. You're halfway to 30, claim to be a writer, but have never been to college or wrote anything. Look at me, I work part-time and go to community college." The most ignorant people in the world are kids in their early 20s who still live off their parents' money. Hershey couldn't grasp the fact that it was harder for me to go to college than it was for him because all he had to do was ask Daddy. Most parents encourage a college education. Hershey was enrolled part-time at San Antonio College, but from the way he was talking, you'd think he was an Ivy League scholar. His parents paid his rent and tuition, but just like the most kids in his position, he thought he'd be doing just as well without their help. "You're going to be 23, and you don't have a single college credit," he told me. "Even if you started going to school, like right now, today, you wouldn't even graduate until you're 28. "I'm taking a different path," I told him. "As long as I graduate by the time I'm 30, that's fine with me. There's no time limit." "You think most people graduate college when they're 30, he asked. "I'm not most people," I told him. I stayed with Hershey for about a week. I tried to make myself scarce, but he never gave me a key and obviously didn't want me there. One Friday, I came home late from day labor and he wouldn't answer the door. I knew he was inside because I could hear him and his friends giggling. I left his porch and never saw him or his crew again. I used my last 50 cents to call Mom. She said I could sleep in her backyard for a night or two if Guy didn't see me, so I trekked across the north side, dangerously alongside the loop side of Loop 410, all the way to Hershey's apartment to Mom's backyard. It took me almost all night. When I got there early the next morning, I was so happy Guy wasn't home. You appreciate the little things when you're living on the street. Mom let me inside and made me a hamburger. I scarfed it down and passed out on her couch while she sat next to me and watched TV. Mom's couch never felt so comfortable. She told me everything was going to work itself out and things would be better, someday. Everyone needs a little parental support now and then. She couldn't take me in or give me a place to stay, but she made me feel much better. Guy got home later that afternoon, so I had to peel myself off Mom's couch and go back outside. Before I left, she gave me a hug and $3. When I left her house and started walking, I saw Michael heading my way. He had the same idea as me. He was looking for some food and parental support. He told me he was also there to raid her garage for supplies to help him build the fort he had started setting up in a park. "I need a few things," he said. Trash bags, blankets, duct tape, the usual. I'm building a shelter. While we have a break here, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. I'll wait while you do it. Okay. Yeah, okay. I was happy to see my brother productive, but then he said he'd been hanging out with Benny's older convicted child molester half-brother, Benny Ray. Michael said Benny Ray asked him to be his roommate in a ghetto one-bedroom apartment in Kirby, Texas, a few miles east of town. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but we'd fallen on tough times. Of course, I don't want to live with him, Michael said, and he probably only wants me there because he's gay issues. Yeah, that's probably the case, I told him. Better watch your back. He's an old man, Michael said. Not that bad. Was he or wasn't he convicted of raping little boys? Yeah, he was in the past, Michael said. He's obviously a little messed up. It's not like I want to live with him, but he's never tried anything with me. I don't think he would, and I'm not a little boy. Michael said he was going to move in as soon as Benny Roll's parole officer okayed it. I told him I didn't like the idea, not one bit, and I'd be there to check up on him almost daily. Benny Ray didn't look scary. He was bald and skinny old man in his late 50s. If you saw him on the street, you wouldn't find him the least bit threatening, but the guy went to prison for playing with little boys, his prepubescent cousins. A registered sex offender, dude had to wear an ankle bracelet and was forbidden to go near babies or children. We'd known Benny Jr. since we were door-to-door newspaper salesmen for John. He was a very good person, one of the best, a harmless pothead. But his older half-brother, Benny Ray, was a convicted pedophile with an appetite for hard drugs and little boys. I called Michael a few days later to try to change his mind, but he'd already moved in. Benny Ray's parole officer couldn't object. They were both adults and weren't breaking any laws. As long as Benny Ray didn't live with any kids, there wasn't anything the parole officer could do. All she had left was her semblance of authority. Later that week, I went and found Benny Jr. to see what he thought about our brothers living together. He told me he'd driven to their new apartment in Kirby, Texas to visit them out of concern and said he saw them wearing nothing but their boxer shorts watching TV. Benny Jr. had just started a satellite sales and installation company and he needed someone to help him sell the satellite dishes and subscriptions. The first person he thought of was me. Benny said I could sleep on his couch if I helped him sell every morning. I took him up on the offer because I needed a place to stay, but most importantly, his new apartment was in the same complex as Michael and Benny Ray. For the next couple months, Benny and I'd go door to door around the north side of San Antonio every morning. We made good money, but my heart wasn't in it, and I figured Benny most likely didn't have the required paperwork, permit, business license anyway. I used most of the money I made on expensive marijuana and cheese enchiladas at a tiny Mexican restaurant nearby. The Tranquil Diner became a second home to me while I stayed with Benny's family. At least once a day, I'd gather my thoughts, get away from the crying baby, Benny the Third, and relax under the quiet mariachi music. We'd usually work a few hours every morning. Benny would drop me off in a nice neighborhood, and I'd knock on a few doors, sweet talk some old ladies, get a few satellite subscription sales, and be back in Kirby sitting on his couch hitting the bong and flipping through a million channels by lunchtime. Sometimes Benny would get out of the car and knock on a few doors with me. It felt exactly like it did back in the day when we were teenagers selling subscriptions for John. Benny Jr.'s apartment was a safe place compared to where Michael was staying at with Benny Ray. Benny Ray's parole officer would occasionally come by to check up on him, but she'd always let him know when she was coming, which gave him ample time to hide the drugs. Michael finally came to his senses after Benny Ray started walking around the apartment naked. I've seen too much, he confided in me. The next day we brainstormed an escape plan. I was rational and told Michael that we should get jobs on the north side and find a cheap apartment of our own, but Michael wanted more of an adventure. The idea came during a New Year's Eve party at Benny Ray's, given to us by an unsuspecting source. One of Benny Jr.'s friends was telling an elaborate bullshit story about walking to Austin from San Antonio in one night. The most amazing part of this man's fairy tale was that everyone in the room, besides Michael and me, actually believed his rubbish. Michael and I rolled our eyes during his story. Both of us had taken the trip by car to Austin enough times and trekked enough miles by foot to know that it'd be impossible to walk from Austin to San Antonio in one night. A few minutes later, we knew what we were going to do. We were going to do what this buffoon claimed he did. We were going to walk from San Antonio to Austin. Michael loved the idea and was the one really pushing it forward. I asked questions that gave him a chance to think it over. We didn't have any money, I told him. We'll just find jobs when we get there, he said. We don't have any food, I said. We'll just raid Mom's pantry before we leave, he told me. It's January, I screamed. What if we freeze? It's not that cold. This is Texas. Even if it does get cold, we'll just build a fire or steal some blankets. We're grown men. He made some good points, and we didn't have anything to lose. I wasn't doing much besides waiting for my financial aid to go to college. What about me going to school? Maybe someday UT, I asked. You want to go to UT? Right, he said. You could just take the entry test in Austin and start going to community college there, right next to UT. We kept our plan a secret. We couldn't tell Benny Ray because he would have flipped out and done something dramatic, like rape Michael. I couldn't tell Benny Jr. because he would have done anything to get me to stay. He wouldn't have hurt me, but I was the key to his business. Without me, he had no sales, no dishes to install, and not much money. We told Mom a few hours before we left. At first, she didn't believe us and acted like we were kidding, a guise to how she actually felt. After she realized we were serious, she started asking us questions like where would we sleep? How would we stay warm? What if someone hurt us? Both of us reassured her that we'd take care of each other. We were originally going to start walking to Austin from Mom's house, but she offered us a ride to the edge of San Antonio. Guy didn't usually let her drive that far out of the neighborhood, but she said she'd make an exception this time. Before we got out of the car, she began crying and made us promise that we'd be okay. This is for the best, I said. We're going to be something someday. I've always had a way of calming Mom's nerves whenever tough situations arose for Michael and me. I've had lots of practice. I kept her sane when I was in jail during various homeless stints and when I was addicted to cocaine. Somehow I convinced her that we'd do great things, make her proud, and give her a bunch of grandchildren. At least you'll have plenty of material to write about when you're a famous author, she told me before I got out of the car. We hit the road and didn't look back. We couldn't look back. That first day, we must have walked 20 miles straight, all the way to Highway 1604. It felt like we weren't just walking for ourselves. We were walking for Mom. The hardest part of getting out of San Antonio was crossing Highway 1604, where it meets up with I-35. Highway 1604 acts like a gatekeeper, which keeps all the people of San Antonio without a car inside. You either had to be in a huge body of steel, or you're basically not allowed to leave. Very few people have crossed the intersection by foot because you gotta dodge cars going 80 miles per hour. One misstep and you're dead. We found a thin concrete barrier to walk across the freeway while dozens of cars zoomed below our feet. The barrier was on a steep angle, and at one point we almost lost balance and went tumbling into rakish traffic where we would have been ripped apart by evening commuters. After we broke out of the concrete pen, it was a straight shot, 60 miles to Austin. We kept a steady pace on the shoulder, and just about every car driving by took their eyes off the road long enough to stare at the two young men walking along the freeway with big backpacks. When it got dark and the temperature dropped, we needed to find shelter or we'd freeze. We would have liked to have kept going, but it wouldn't have been smart to walk at night because of the tension it would have brought. Michael spotted a decaying shed in a field about 400 yards from the road. It was in the middle of a clearing and looked like no one had been there in years. The crusty building had one small triangular window busted out on its side. Its roof was almost gone, half eaten by years of termites, shipworms, and God knows what else. The grass in the field that separated the shack from the freeway was waist high, likely full of snakes. But it was nighttime, in the middle of winter, so we figured most of the poisonous ones were probably asleep or hibernating. We had to move quickly from the road to the building because if anyone saw two bums jostling toward a vacant shack on private land, they almost for certain called the cops. Once we got to the building, I told Michael to go inside and check for animals or bumps. I waited a safe distance away and heard Michael doing some rustling and chewing. I clenched my fists, waited for an encounter, but was relieved to see two scruffy animals run off into the distance. Just a couple of critters, Michael yelled. All clear. The inside of the shed was scarier than the outside. The only light came from the moon shining in the triangular window. It brightened the place just enough to see the white termites and albino roaches crawling around what was left of the walls of the shack. It's not that bad, Michael said. I'd stay here for a while if we didn't have somewhere else to go. We sat on the broken floorboards and leaned up against each other, back to back. Michael opened a can of beans and we broke out the weed. We each took a couple hits. It was relieving to get high and relax after such an exhausting day. Marijuana puts things in perspective. Nothing is as bad as you think. Neither of us could fall asleep, so we stayed up smoking cigarettes, telling jokes, and figuring out what we were going to do when we got to Austin. While we were talking, we came up with the idea of me joining a research study. We knew a place that tested drugs on people for money. Michael did it a couple years earlier, and their only requirement was good health and clean urine. When the sun came up, we saw that the shed we slept in was apparently some kind of model airplane clubhouse from the early 1980s. There were worn-down paintings of different model airplanes on the wall and airplane pieces scattered all over the floor. Apparently, we were the only souls to visit this post-apocalyptic Norman Rockwell scene in years. After an hour, we hit the road. I couldn't believe how dirty we'd gotten. The first thing we needed to do was find a bathroom to clean up and hide what we could of being homeless. The second day was much harder, and that can of beans we shared the night before didn't give us much energy. After a couple miles, we decided to use one of the few dollars Mom gave us on a cheap hamburger. I suggested we sit down, neatly cut the burger in half, and take a much deserved break. But Michael ripped it in two, and we devoured it like starving animals. By midday, we made it through most of New Braunfels without any problems from the police or passing cars. A few jerks yelled obscenities out their windows, but overall it had been an unruffled journey and a great time to think about where we'd been and where we were going. You ever been in a car? I asked Michael, jokingly in a rundown old man homeless voice. He started laughing and said also in the southern homeless voice, Once, a long time ago. The joke kept our spirits up for the rest of the day, and we added variations to it like, You ever been in a house? And you ever had a hot shower? Or you ever ate food? The joke kept our spirits up for the rest of the day, and we added, okay. The absurdity of the joke helped us ignore the people driving by gawking, like we really hadn't ever been in a car or had a shower. On that second day, we walked as fast as we could until the sun set and we were falling over, drunk with fatigue. It was colder than it was the night before, and we were walking north into the wind. We needed shelter, so I suggested camping under a highway overpass, but we didn't want to trespass on another homeless person's camp. We thought about jumping a vacant house's fence and huddling down on an empty porch, but that would have been breaking and entering, a felony. The temperature dropped and the wind began to blow hard. We were running out of time and started feeling the early stages of hypothermia. I can still remember the sting of rain falling on my neck while we scurried around trying to find somewhere warm. We finally jumped a barbed wire fence and came across a draping Texas oak tree, not too far from a trespassers will be shot sign. We hunkered under the tree and leaned up against each other, back to back, wet and shivering. Not exactly trying to sleep, just trying to survive until morning. The tree we were under was only a few miles from where our father lived. After he kicked us out, he had a $1 million mansion custom built for him and our sisters. He never gave us the address and made clear we weren't welcome. I wonder if the local papers would have mentioned him and his expensive house if they had found his 2 frozen sons under the tree the next day. Horrible father. After a few agonizing hours, the dark turned to an overcast gray and it was warm enough to open our eyes. It was still below freezing, so we had to get walking in order to get our blood circulating. We didn't say much. After a night like that, there's not much to say. Our silence broke in unison when we noticed a squad car pulling up. We were honest. We told him we were walking to Austin to make a better life for ourselves. I told him I planned to go to UT and he laughed. UT, he said? You're homeless on the side of the freeway. I went to UT, he told me. You be lucky to go to cooking school. The cop didn't have shit besides being a prick, so he called for backup, and later minute 2 more cars came to assist. They searched us, ran our names, threw a fit, but couldn't come up with shit. I had dozens of paid warrants all around Texas, but I knew jurisdictions rarely share that information, and I wasn't worried a bit. Finally, after the banter and derision, they let us go. It took over an hour, but gave us a break from walking. Unaware to me, Michael did have contraband on him. He had a small amount of pot stashed in his wallet. He wanted to make sure we had some weed to smoke for our trip. Every night after we made camp, he'd break it out and we'd each take a couple hits. It gave us something to look forward to. By the time we got through San Marcos, we started to feel the effects of our 70-mile January hike. Michael developed a cough and I slightly twisted my ankle. I found a wooden crutch and Michael stole some cough drops and we trekked on. When we got to the outlet malls in San Marcos, we stopped at the first fast food place we saw, but hesitated to go inside. It was during lunch rush and packed with the Texas State crowd. Normally, we wouldn't have given a shit, but we looked and felt dirtier than either of us had ever been. So we decided to sit on the grass and wait for business to calm down. We needed a break and the grass was soft. We'd come a long way and felt proud. It was a peaceful moment until a truckload of Texas State students drove by, whooping and hollering at us from the windows of their new pickup truck that their daddy bought them. We didn't want to go inside with all the college kids, but our stomachs needed their hamburger ration. So we dusted ourselves off and went to claim our cheeseburger. The second we swung open the door, the brats snickered at our appearance. We ignored them, ordered our burger, and sat down. After we got it, I got out a knife and began cutting it in half. The college students thought this was funny, and one of them even had the nerve to throw a quarter in our direction, which Michael didn't hesitate to snatch up off the floor before we left. By the end of the day, we made it to the rest stop in Kyle and were less than 15 miles from Austin. The sun went down and we took a break on the grass, watching the cars, flickering lights on I-35. Our bones ached and we weren't looking forward to the last stretch. When we finally got up a couple hours later, we walked another hour until we got to the Austin City Limits road sign. Totally beat, we jumped a barbed wire fence and spent a second night illegally camping on someone's land. Waking up at dawn, we walked straight down the side of the highway and got to the outskirts of town. After we started seeing homes and businesses, we finally exited I-35. We got to the southernmost Austin City bus stop, took off our heavy backpacks, and threw our filthy asses on the bench. We were malnourished, dehydrated, and completely exhausted. But we walked from San Antonio to Austin, just like we said we would. As soon as we got on a bus and made it to campus, we got into a big argument. We made it to Austin, but things were just as hard as they were when we were walking. I suggested we use the few quarters we had left to call Mom and tell her we were okay. She had a way of calming us down after we'd been fighting. We used the payphone at Dobie Mall, and as soon as she picked up, I knew she'd gotten worse. I felt guilty because I knew she'd been worried sick about her twin boys walking to Austin like a couple of highway ruffians. I tried to calm her down and told her everything was going to be okay, but she blamed herself and said she wished she would have been a better mother. She said she'd stop taking her medication. "It's the only thing I can do to get my strength back," she said. I didn't know what to tell her. I've wanted my pre-medicated mother back since I was 10, but the antipsychotic pills she took prevented schizophrenia. The side effect of the hardcore prescription was that it left her with no energy to do anything besides go to work, come home, and sit in front of the TV and watch more ads for more medication. I didn't want to worry and told her how we were doing. I didn't want her to worry and told her how well we were doing. I told her about my financial aid for college and that I'd be a full-time student at ACC that fall. She said she was proud of me, and that's when I knew she was losing it. Before I even asked, she said she was going to send us $50. Michael spoke to her for a few minutes after I did, and we both felt better and stopped fighting with each other after the call. You guys cut it out! Hold on.
Donald, that's not what they teach our sister. Come on. Be nice to Moses.
Cats are fighting. While we have a break here, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. It'll only take you a second, and I'm trying to build this channel to something good. I know you're enjoying the reading, so also this book is available on homeless college students, also under Gonzo Education. It's available for like $2 on Amazon right now, and I think it's 99 cents on Kindle. So I encourage you to get the whole book, and you're really helping out the author, and you're really helping things out in life. Okay. When it got dark, okay. We picked up the money at a 7-Eleven an hour later. It felt good having money for food, but it was priceless knowing someone out there cared. We immediately went to the food court at Dobie Mall and in less than 2 minutes devoured 4 slices of pepperoni, our first hot meal in days. After pizza, we hid an ashtray for a couple half-burnt cigarettes and smoked them in front of the clock tower, watching pretty UT co-eds go by. When it got dark, we walked to the edge of campus and found 2 buildings under construction, the future home of the Blanton Art Museum. In a few years, the half-built building would be Central Texas's prized art gallery, but on this particular night, it housed 2 shivering young artists. We climbed over the yellow caution tape and crawled up a half-built staircase where we found an empty gallery and sat on the cold, sawdust-sprinkled concrete floor, the perfect smoke spot. We thought about staying there all night. Neither of us wanted to go back out in the cold, but we were trespassing, and it would have been too hard to get ourselves up off the cold cement early the next morning before the construction crew got there. So we got up, dusted ourselves off, walked a couple miles to Shoal Creek, because that was the only place we could think of. For the next week, until my physical for the research study, we didn't steer far from UT. We hid our backpacks and unused dirty clothes under the rocks at Shoal Creek. We were still pretty dirty, but it wasn't as obvious that we were homeless. I was even confident enough to talk to a few cute college girls. It was fun being back on the drag and going to Barnes & Noble, La Fun Arcade, and half-price books. Michael would get a cheap cup of coffee at Metro Coffee every morning. He never told me where he got the money. I guess he had a secret coffee fund. Most of the day we spent out of the cold watching TV in Dobie Mall. The spring semester was about to start, and students were slowly returning from winter break. I'd sit there and watch them arrive. The hardest part of winter hit while we were camping at Shoal Creek. Every night, we'd crawl under a huge limestone rock. It was the only thing we could do to stay warm. When the sun came up, we headed to the Dobie Mall bathroom where we take turns warming up under the electric hand dryer with the Capitol's other resident bums. We would have tried panhandling, but we didn't fit the part like drag rats did. We were just as down as out as they were, sleeping in the woods, not a penny to our name, not much family to speak of, but we couldn't ever justify begging when we got our own arms and legs. On the day of my physical for the research study, I knew I had weed in my system, but we had a potion that I stole from a head shop that supposedly removed all traces of toxins being detected in urine. I drank it an hour before my physical, but I had no idea if it'd work. Michael waited outside the lab rat place with our blankets and bags. If I was accepted, he was going to hang around Austin for a few weeks until I got out with the money. We needed the cash, but more importantly, I craved a warm bed and a break from homelessness. I went inside, and the first thing they did was took me into a room with a bunch of other people in it, already in it. A few of them gave me dirty looks. They could probably tell I hadn't showered in a month. After sitting in silence for 20 minutes, a young nurse came in and said everyone had to take their socks and shoes off for the official weigh-in. A lump built up in my throat, and my heart began to race. They couldn't have caught my feet at a worse time. I hadn't taken my shoes off since San Antonio, and I had over 100 miles worth of sweat, blisters, and ripped toenails hidden inside my cheap sneakers. I stayed positive and told myself that since it was so cold outside, the winter weather counter-reacted with the sweating in my feet and created a neutral area inside my shoe which made an undetectable odor. This assumption proved incorrect, because when I took off my shoes and peeled off my bloody socks, the room quickly became engulfed with toxic gas, ammonia, one of the worst odors known. It was so embarrassing, some people thought they were getting pranked. I was afraid of getting arrested. I tried to remember if I'd ever heard of anyone being prosecuted for smelly feet. Some people actually walked out, but most of them just held their noses and looked away. I stared at the floor at my disgusting curled toes in shame. My face was as red as my blood-stained socks. I couldn't look anyone in the eye. The nurse giving the weigh-in stared at me. She didn't know what to do. They obviously hadn't gone over this in training. Finally, she told everyone to stay put while she spoke to me in private in the hall. I wanted to crawl under the rock I'd crawled out of. The nurse didn't bother me with too many questions. She politely asked why my feet smelt so bad and if there was anything wrong with them. I told her I hadn't showered or taken my shoes off in a few weeks because it had been so cold outside. She thought about this for a few long seconds before finally asking if I was homeless. To keep my embarrassment to a minimum, I left out the part about walking to Austin and told her that I was indeed living on the streets. Then she politely informed me that their facility didn't accept homeless people. I apologized, put on my shoes, and left. Michael was waiting for me in the parking lot, and I knew I'd gotten rejected the second he saw me. What? He screamed. The potion didn't work? I never even got a chance to use it, I told him. She said their facility didn't take homeless people. How'd she know you were homeless? He asked. The second I got there, we had to take off our shoes and socks. What? He barked. I told you to clean your feet. Well, looks like we're going back to San Antonio now. Michael doesn't like surprises, and if something goes off course, he won't hesitate to abort. I wasn't accepted into the research study, so now he wanted to go back to San Antonio and brought up the usual selling points. We could use Mom's house to shower, we knew the lay of the land, and he was going back with or without me. Fine, I'll go back, I said, for Mom. It would have been too hard to walk back to San Antonio, so we either had to find a ride or enough money for bus tickets. We'd already spent the $50 Mom sent us. We would have asked for more, but since she quit her job, God wouldn't even let her buy groceries. We tried doing day labor, but work was scarce. We hung around a day labor place for a few days, but they didn't offer us a single job. Michael suggested we call one of our sisters in San Marcos. She lived at our father's mansion and had a part-time job in Austin. Michael knew she drove back and forth along I-35 every day. She probably saw us walking, but never in a million years would she have offered us a ride. I wasn't thrilled about the idea and took a walk around campus while Michael used the payphone to call her. I strolled around the clock tower and went inside a few buildings. I felt more comfortable in the areas and streets surrounding UT. Whenever I was in an official University of Texas building, I always feared someone would notice and tell me to leave. When I got back to Dobie, Michael said she'd lend us $40 and for him to wait for her at the Slotsky's near campus. While we waited on the deli's outside patio, the smell of fresh baked bread was torture. We thought about robbing the place just for their sourdough. Our sister was almost an hour late when she pulled up in the new Chevy Tahoe our father got her. She didn't bother turning off her engine, wouldn't look either of us in the eye, and jumped out like she was pulling an annoying flyer off the windshield. She handed each of us a $20 bill like we were children, and quickly got back in her expensive SUV before speeding down 29th Street to Lamar. We spent the rest of the afternoon walking across town to the Greyhound station. When we finally got there, we saw a bunch of people huddled around a TV hanging from the ceiling. There was a local weatherman talking about an ice storm heading toward Texas. Michael and I stood at the back of the crowd and listened too. It felt and listen to. It felt relevant. We watched the weather forecast for a minute before buying one-way tickets to San Antonio. It felt good knowing we were going back to familiar ground. Our bus didn't leave until early the next morning, so we spent the next night hanging around the station, chatting with transients, bumming smokes off elderly, and playing video games against little kids. We didn't say much during the ride back. Michael slept most of the way while I stared out the window at the passing ground we'd walked on 2 weeks earlier. I felt like I was in a music video. You can try to predict it, but you never know how you're going to get somewhere. It was dark when we got to San Antonio Greyhound Station, but the place was bustling with late-night Latinos and local cholos. The San Antonio Greyhound Station is nothing like the one in Austin. The one in Austin is spacious, clean, and well lit, but the San Antonio station is dangerous, crowded, and scattered with puddles of urine. We got off the bus and squeezed our way through the crowd of late-nighters, over the sticky floor, and into the January morning. After walking north a few miles, we jumped on a bus heading down Broadway. We got off the bus at Austin Highway and walked another 2 miles to Mom's house. Guy hadn't left for work yet, so we hung out in a ditch across the street and waited patiently. We sat there Indian style and spoke about our journey. We were melancholy and drained, but very relieved to have made it back to the closest thing that we could call home. We wanted to feel like we'd accomplished something and didn't walk to Austin for no reason, so we sat in the ditch for a couple hours going everything that we'd experienced in the past 3 weeks. We got lost in conversation, and Guy had long gone to work. It was safe to crawl in through a window and wake up Mom. She was happy to see us. She gave each of us a big hug and checked to see if we still had all our limbs. "You boys walked all the way to Austin," she said. "Well, that's something you can be proud of." It was good seeing her, but neither of us had seen her this crazy since third grade. She developed noticeable tics and was saying weird things like, "Put salt in before you fry an egg," or "A sweater is useful when it rains." "Yeah, we get it, Mom, a sweater when it rains," Michael told her. "Sit down," she said. "I want to talk to you boys." It was hard to find somewhere to sit among the thousands of boxes of junk. Guy's hoarding had reached new levels since Mom quit her job. It was his way of getting back at her. The clutter of flea market crap wasn't helping her sanity, and she was never going to get better living there. Hundreds of boxes were piled 6 feet high. The only free space was the aisles he made to the kitchen, living room, and backyard. It was a human mouse maze that was only encouraging her insanity. "Guy and I are having problems," Mom said, "but I want you boys to know that whatever happens, I still love you." "We're not 12, Mom," I said. "Yeah, and we hate Guy," Michael said. "Leave his ass." We found a couple boxes in front of the TV to sit on while my Mom cooked us each a hamburger. Michael and I looked at each other puzzled. Neither of us had any idea what to do. Mom was the only person who ever cared about us, and part of her was on vacation. Her appearance was daunting. She had her hair in rollers and was wearing an inappropriate nightgown that looked more like lingerie as she twitched around the kitchen, mumbling inaudible phrases. We went to the backyard to talk where she couldn't hear us. "She needs out of this house," Michael told me. "Yeah, where is she going to go?" I asked. "Well, she won't go to Kerrville," he said, "but her brother in Kansas?" For years, Mom wanted to leave Guy, but her meds chained her down. Guy was in control of her money, and all she had was a few credit cards. She didn't have any close friends, and she refused to go to her parents' house in Kerrville. The only place we could think of going was Kansas. We'd never been there, but it's where she grew up, so we figured if we could just get her there, then she'd stop being crazy. For the next few hours, we chilled at her house, watching TV and telling her about our adventure in Austin. She laughed hard when I got to the part about my stinky feet in the research facility. It was nice to see her laugh at something that wasn't a hallucination. Later that afternoon, the weather report came on and said a massive cold front was coming to South Texas. It was getting into the 20s with freezing rain. Mom said she'd ask Guy if we could stay the night, but when he got there, he was in a bad mood and told us to leave. We hugged Mom and hit the streets just before the sun went down. It only freezes about 12 nights a year in San Antonio, but this was one of those nights. As soon as we left, the wind started blowing. I knew it would be crazy to camp in these conditions, so I tried to convince Michael to come with me to the downtown Salvation Army shelter, but he refused. Michael dismissed homeless shelters at all costs. No matter how bad the weather got, he'd rather tough it out. He'd never go to a shelter, and it was useless trying to convince the mule. Before we left Mom's, he grabbed a box of trash bags, a rusty knife, and a half roll of duct tape from her garage. "It's all I need to survive," he told me. I went with him to the woods to try to get him to reconsider while he built his fort. Earlier in the day, I called the Salvation Army from Mom's house and knew I had to be there at 7 p.m. or get turned away, so I helped Michael gather branches for an hour before I got on a bus to downtown. I hadn't been to a homeless shelter since Bakersfield and didn't know what to expect. The only reason I was going on this particular night was because of the weather. I was nervous when I got there, but the resident bums made me feel welcome. I still had to watch my back. A homeless shelter is about as safe as county jail. Keep your head down and don't draw attention to yourself. The AFC championship game was on, so I feigned an interest to avoid conversation. The storm covered the city with a 2-inch thick sheet of ice, and every school, bus, and highway was shut down. I was up all night worrying about Michael. The next morning, I hiked to where I last saw him in the woods, but the only thing I found was an abandoned shelter made of trash bags and duct tape. I shouted out his name, but nobody answered. It was the coldest weather we'd ever seen, and I wasn't sure he survived. I had to get back to the shelter. The temperature hadn't gotten above freezing, so I had to get indoors for another night. The second night wasn't as easy as the first. There wasn't a football game on, so I had a bunch of homeless bums trying to make friends with me. I went back to the woods the next day, and there was still no sign of Michael. My brain conjured up an image of his frozen blue body hiding under a meager pile of branches and leaves. Not seeing him 2 days, I prayed harder, knowing he might not have made it. The National Institute Coalition for the Homeless states on their website that between 1999 and 2002, 3 years, over 4,000 people died from hypothermia-related deaths in the United States. That means every year, thousands of people run out of money and friends, get stuck in the cold, and die. 3 days after the cold front hit, it stopped raining and finally got about 50 degrees. If Michael survived the first 2 nights, he could easily survive the third. I ditched the shelter and camped in Mom's backyard. If he was going to show up anywhere, it'd be there. The next morning after Guy left for work, I went inside and started watching TV when Michael busted down the door looking like a Neanderthal. He was covered in dirt, smelled bad, and his hair was in the shape of a beehive. "You're alive," I shouted. "Barely," he said solemnly. Mom gave him a hug and said, "Michael, you need a bath." "What happened?" I asked. He sat down, took a deep breath, and said, "Well, the shelter I built out of trash bags held up till the middle of the night, but then it started to collect pockets of rainwater. Big pockets." Michael can be a great storyteller when he wants to. As soon as the temperature dropped below freezing, the water froze, the trash bag burst, and half-frozen, ice-cold rainwater came crashing down on me. I got totally soaked. "What'd you do after that?" I asked. "Well, I had to get out of those clothes," he said. "It was only going to get colder, so I went to the set of the apartments and found the first open closet door, got inside, stripped naked, and stayed there for 3 days." "What? No way. How'd you go to the bathroom?" I asked. "I just went in the corner of the closet," he said. "Gross," Mom yelled. "Michael, you'll get sick." I didn't have time to worry about that. I had to survive. "Did anyone come by while you were in there?" I asked him. "No, but I did hear voices outside and people walking by." "What would you have done if they opened the door?" "I don't know," he said, "but I'd pull the broomstick I was using as a weapon closer in case anyone tried anything." Thank God no cleaning lady opened a seemingly harmless closet door, only to find a naked broom-wielding maniac crouched next to a pile of his own feces. For the next few weeks, the 3 of us felt like a family when Guy wasn't home. Mom let Michael drive her on errands while I sat in the back making comments and telling jokes. Mom said she was too nervous to drive, and Michael's life usually revolves around having a car. Mom wasn't working, so Michael and I were around her all day and had plenty of time to soften her up and convince her to leave Guy. Something was going to give. Guy got pissed seeing us there every day, so he started bringing home more boxes of useless crap to pile around the house. Mom was losing her space and sanity. Guy even started stacking them in her bedroom, the last room free of clutter. Mom was getting worse, and we knew we had to do something, so one morning Michael took me to the backyard and said he had a plan. He told me he wanted me to make one last attempt to convince Mom to go to Kansas, willingly. He asked me to tug on her heartstrings, and that I had a better chance of convincing her than anyone. I went back inside, sat next to Mom on the couch, held her hand, and said, "You deserve to live somewhere where both of your sets of twins are welcome, a place we can all spend Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's what you've always wanted, and it's not too much to ask for, either." She was quiet for a second, and I noticed a tear swell up in her eye. "I want to," she said, "but who's going to take care of me?" "We're going to take care of you," Michael shouted as he stormed in. "I don't want to talk about it," she said. "Michael, can you still drive me to the laundry later?" "Yes, I can," Michael answered. 20 minutes later, Michael took me in the garage and let me in on what he'd been conjuring. He was anxious, covered in sweat, and was carrying a roll of painter's tape and a miniature baseball bat. "I wasn't even going to tell you," he said, "but I don't want you trying to get all hero, get in a fight with me, and mess things up for all of us." "What are you talking about?" I asked. Kansas, he said. We're going one way or another. You heard Mom, she's not ready, I said. She doesn't know what she wants, he screamed. She'll say that for years until she dies. Hey, watch your mouth, I told him. Listen, I have a plan, but I need your help, he said. What's your plan, I asked. When you ain't got nothing, you ain't got nothing to lose, he said, quoting Dylan. I knew his harebrained scheme had little chance of succeeding, and even though I half-assed tried to talk him out of it, I was totally down. I don't know, Michael, I said. This is basically illegal. It's not illegal if you go along with it. You don't have to do anything besides keep your mouth shut. I need your help, he said. Why do you need my help, I asked. I need you to let me tie you up and put you in the trunk. What? No way, I'm claustrophobic. Come on, he said. After a few miles, you can just come tossing in through the back seat. Once she sees you all tied up, she'll know we're serious. Quit saying we, I told him. What are you going to do when she starts crying, I asked. How are you going to stop her gas? How are we going to eat? Nothing she can do about it, he said. I'll fill the tank before we leave and we won't have to stop till Abilene. By then, it'll be too late. I know Michael better than anyone, and he has a noble sense of right and wrong, but he goes about getting justice with the vigilante's mentality. I let Michael wrap painter's tape around my wrist, ankles, and mouth. It was itchy and ripped patches of hair off my head. Then he walked me outside and I hopped to the back of the car. I tried to get in the trunk, but he'd emptied Mom's closet and shoved all her clothes, with the hangers still on them, and there was hardly any room. He kept poking me with the bat and screaming, Hurry up, before the neighbors see. Then he slammed the trunk down smack on the top of my head. Suddenly, I was in complete darkness with next to no air, getting stabbed in the side by stingy metal clothes hangers. A few minutes later, I heard Michael and Mom get in the car. Where's Gregory? She asked. He's nearby, Michael said, chillingly. By the time we'd gone 2 blocks, I was having a panic attack and needed out of that trunk. I kicked to the back seat until the latch gave way and I spilt in the cab. Mom swung her head around the passenger seat and screamed in terror at the sight of her bound son. Michael, what have you done? She screamed. You didn't want to do it the easy way, he said. This is the hard way. Michael, turn around, Mom screamed. Untie your brother. I'm not untying anyone, he yelled. Then she reached in the back seat and ripped the tape off my mouth. Arr, untie me, you bastard. Stop this car, I screamed. Nobody's going anywhere, he yelled while stepping on the gas. Then I ripped my arms apart, got behind Michael and put him in a chokehold as he swerved Mom's little red Suzuki in and out of I-35. Finally, Mom started crying and Michael had to pull over. He couldn't do it, not with her crying. He turned the car around and took us back to Guy's house. The 3 of us went inside without saying a word. I still had painter's tape dangling from my wrists and ankles. Mom threw her purse on the kitchen table and locked herself in her bedroom. A few seconds later, I heard the front door slam, an engine start, and a car peel away. Mom heard the same thing and we both ran outside to see that Michael had stolen her car, cell phone, and one of her credit cards. 5 minutes later, he called the house and told her not to call the cops, but he'd stolen the car and was on his way to Kansas. If she wanted the car, her cell phone, and all of her clothes back, she'd have to come to Kansas. Mom told Michael to be careful before hanging up the phone and laughing louder than I'd heard her laugh in years. A few minutes later, she called me to her room. So, you want to go to Kansas, she asked? I was thinking we could stay with my brother, Uncle Jay. Mom, we don't have any money. What about Guy, I asked. I have credit cards, she said. Guy can't take those. Michael only took the gas card. Don't worry about Guy. I'm leaving him. Are you sure this is what you want to do? I asked. Yes, she said. I want to live somewhere where all of my children are welcome. I don't want you boys worrying about being homeless. I spent 6 months sleeping outside, but I was finally going to have a place to live in Kansas. That was chapter 6 of the Gregory Brandt's wonderful book, Homeless College Student. You can also find it under Gonzo Education. They're all like using the, I live in this ghetto-ass apartment complex, so I'm trying to help build this channel, so click the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button. Those vacuums that you heard, those were from the illiterate assholes that don't like to hear me read, so they run the vacuum. But they still can't read. I've finished up, haters. I mean, if that's not a hater, I don't know what is. Like, they're not even cleaning, they're just turning the vacuum on. You know. But anyways, thank you for watching. Once again, click the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, and check out this book. It's available for $1.99 on Kindle and something like $6 regular. It's one of the best books you'll buy. I totally give it 5 stars. You'll totally love it. You can also find it under Gonzo Education, so that's Homeless College Student. Thanks again for listening, and have a nice day.